All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to, I guess it's Wednesday, apparently. That's what my computer says. Hopefully it's right. Couple of items of housekeeping before we get going. First item is keep in mind that tomorrow we're having our fourth quiz. So we'll do the same thing as we normally do. I'll do the online people first between about 10 and 11. And then in-class people can come in and write from 11 till 11:45. So be ready for that and study hard and good luck. Second thing, don't forget that Friday is a holiday. It's Good Friday, so you don't have to come into class. There will be no class. The third thing I need to tell you is that because of recent changes in COVID protocols, we now all have to wear our masks all the time. So even when we're just sitting at our desks, we have to wear them. So I'm going to keep mine on from now on, and you should as well. For online people, I think the volume should be okay. Let me know if it's not, but I think you should be able to hear me, and I'm sorry you can't see my mouth move. Maybe I could get a puppet. And I go, today in comparative culture. No, sorry. So, anyone got a spare sock? I can just do a sock puppet. So I'll be wearing this, and you should be too. And I'm sorry that you can't really see my face. It's probably a little harder to follow what I'm saying, but that's what we have to do now. Last thing I will say to you is that. And I said this to my social justice class this morning. I have a few things kind of going on in my life outside of the college, and they're taking up a lot of time. And so I am behind in my marking, and I meant to have your micropapers back to you earlier, but as you probably know, I do not have them back to you. And so I'm desperately trying to mark and finish them, but it's taken me longer than I thought. And that's not your fault. It's not your problem. It's not an excuse. But in social justice, what we talked about is that I would extend the paper deadline maybe to Thursday. So currently the deadline is April 11th at midnight. And so April 11th is the Sunday before exam week. And what we talked about in social justice is that we would extend that deadline to Thursday the 15th. So an extra 4 days. I'll do it at midnight again. What the heck? Thursday at midnight will be the actual deadline, because I'll need a few days to mark, because I have to have your marks in by Monday morning, which is the 19th, I think, at 8 o'clock in the morning. And if I don't have your marks in, I'm toast. So, so that's kind of what we talked about and agreed upon this morning in social justice, is that I'll give you a few more days to write. And also what I'll say is that if you hand it in a little bit earlier than that, I can get you some audio comments back on the paper. If you hand it in on Thursday, like late Thursday, my ability to do those audio comments, I may not be able to do them. So it'll kind of depend on how people hand them in. So if a bunch of people hand them in early, or if they kind of hand them in, during that week, a few at a time, it should be okay. I'll be able to keep up with them. But if everybody kind of waits till the last minute and hands everything in on Thursday, I'm going to be drowning in things, and I may not be able to provide those audio comments. So if you want the comments, hand it in early and I can do it. If you don't care so much, or if you're just really behind, hand it in by the Thursday, and I'll do my best to do them. Good morning, Sophie. I'll do my best to do them, but I can't guarantee it because it's a shorter window. And so so I apologize for the lateness in the marking, but is that acceptable? A few extra days? And the other thing is, I'll probably give you a class to work on your paper next week as well. Maybe on Tuesday or something. We'll do a class that you can have a little more class time to work as well. So that's maybe what I'll offer you, if that's okay. Online people, is that okay with you as well? Maybe you can let me know. Hadil, is that okay with you? Yeah? Noah? Good? Everybody good? Okay. I'm going to take that as a yes. That's what we'll do. I will revise the due date in Microsoft Teams so it will be accurate. And again, if you're done and you can hand it in early, by all means hand it in early, and I can mark it early and I can give you some audio comments and we're good to go. If you're running a little behind, or if you need that additional time, take it. I'll try to do the audio comments for you, but depending on how people hand things in, I may be a little too squished, or I may be okay. Okay? All right. So, that said, let's go back to Rome. So, we finished watching the video yesterday. We talked about the Christians. Who is Constantine, and why was he important to this story? Anybody? An emperor, yes, Emperor of Rome, Constantine is. Now, why is he kind of important to this phase of our story? Yeah, so this is a time of turmoil and civil war, and so we didn't really get a chance to talk about this, and we don't really have a ton of time to go into it. But if you remember, in the late Republic, we had Roman generals with loyal armies behind them who were constantly fighting civil wars for power. And something like that almost starts to happen with some emperors, because since the emperor is the head of the military, sometimes the military says, well, we like this guy, so we're all going to swear allegiance to him, and in that way we'll make him the emperor, right? So it kind of happens the other way, rather than the Senate picking an emperor and then that emperor is in charge of the military. The military says, we choose this guy to be in charge, so now he should be the emperor. And so you kind of have the reverse happening, where emperors are proclaimed from the bottom, not from the top. And so you do have some civil wars between different parts of the army as the army tries to put one of their commanders into the role of emperor. And sometimes it works. So Constantine is fighting one of these civil wars because he's one of these generals that has been, his army is trying to put him in the seat of emperor. But he goes to battle in under the banner of this Christian God, right? And so he sees this, he looks up into the sky one day, apparently. He has this vision, and he has this idea that if I think he has a dream. If he goes to battle, under this sign, then he will be victorious, right? And what's the sign that he sees? He looks at the sun, and what does he see? What does he see? Yeah, he thinks he sees some Greek letters, right? He thinks he sees an X, what we know as an X, and a P, right? And so what are those? It's not an English X and a P, it's a Greek one. The name of Rome? Nope.
Was it complete? Was it Jesus Christ?
Yeah, it's the first two levels of the Greek word for Christ, right? The Greek word is Christos, and the X is kind of the X, I think, is kind of a hard KH kind of sound, and the P is actually an R, right? So it's the first two letters of Christ in the Greek language. And so Constantine looks at the sun, he thinks he sees this symbol, he has this dream that says if he goes into battle under the protection of this sign, he will be triumphant. He is triumphant, and then what does he do? Yeah, then he and I think this is after the battle, but yeah, he becomes baptized and he becomes a Christian. He becomes a full-on a full-on Christian. What else does he do after that? I don't know if he necessarily bans them, and you might be right and you might be wrong. Are you kind of guessing, or do you know that? Yeah, he kind of starts treating he starts treating Christianity preferentially, right? So he starts promoting Christians into prominent government positions. He starts giving money and land to the Christian church. And so Christianity really flourishes under Constantine and kind of becomes maybe the unofficial official religion of the empire. And so the Roman Empire, or at least the eastern part of it, becomes basically a Holy Roman Empire. And so Christianity and the Roman Empire kind of fuse into one thing. After the battle. And so, yeah, so Christianity has kind of been growing in numbers and growing in power for a few hundred years. And then under Constantine, he's the first emperor to convert to Christianity and then to really, rather than persecute it, actually support it, right? Again, putting Christians into government positions, giving money to the Christian church, and kind of establishing it as the main religion of the empire, which again is wild, right? Especially for, a religion that started out tiny with just a few people, and a couple hundred years earlier, those people were being persecuted, they were being martyred, they were being killed because they were blamed for setting a great fire in Rome in 64 AD, or because they refused to sacrifice to the Roman gods and to the emperor. And now they're basically the religion of the Roman Empire. Crazy, right? So it's kind of an interesting story where, this religion kind of slowly grows in power. It kind of starts to fuse itself with the Roman kind of hierarchical structure, and then eventually it becomes the religion of the empire itself. And so people kind of stop worshiping the old Roman gods for the most part, and they start worshiping the Christian one, right? And so, yeah, let me see. I forget what my next slide is. Oh, okay. So that kind of happens in about, oh gosh, when does Constantine do that? I think it's in about the 300s AD. So it's kind of the middle to the late part of the Roman Empire. So obviously we don't have a Roman Empire anymore, so it must have disappeared at some point. And indeed it did, right? And so here, this little graphic marks the end of the empire as 476 AD. And so just to give you a little bit of background and maybe to give us some closure on the story of Rome, this is kind of how Rome slowly fades and comes apart, okay? So we know that after Augustus, the empire becomes sort of too big and too complicated for one person or one city to manage, right? So Rome, the Roman Republican system was created basically just to govern the city, right? That's all it was supposed to do. And then, things got a little out of hand. They created this position for Augustus, and Augustus tried to control the Republic, but it's still a massive, complicated empire. And again, it's too big for one small group, one small city to control. Again, there's still massive economic inequality within Rome. Some people have lots of power and money, but most people are incredibly poor, right? So in modern society, we're used to having kind of a bunch of people in the middle class, right? People who are not poor, people who are not rich, but they just kind of have a comfortable living, right? But that kind of doesn't exist in Rome. you're either wildly rich or there's lots of people with next to nothing. Again, now that they've put a single person, or they've given so much power to a single person, we know that how things go is pretty reliant on how good that person is, right? You get a good emperor, things are okay. You get a bad emperor, everything is disastrous, right? And so, again, you get a few good emperors mixed in here and there. You get a bunch of meh, okay emperors, and then you have some that are just, are the worst, right? And so it's kind of an up and down period for the Roman Empire. Depending on who the emperor is, things are either pretty good or so-so, or maybe sometimes disastrous. There kind of is a shift in what the Romans are looking at and what they're thinking of. And so at one time the Romans were they're very into themselves, right? The glory of Rome, and they were kind of obsessed with Rome, and they thought they were the greatest civilization, right? And everyone else was a bunch of barbarians. But now they've kind of forgotten about that, and they've started to look outward. And so they start to idolize other cultures, right? They start to pay more attention to Greek culture, to Egyptian culture. This is a period where there's actually lots of Roman tourists that go to Egypt to marvel at the pyramids and the ruins of Egypt, just like people do today. And so the Romans have kind of become more interested in other cultures rather than themselves. They kind of forget who they are and what they once stood for and what their kind of original values were. And at the same time, the magic is gone, right? So people who once were happy to be part of the Roman Empire are resentful of Rome. They don't want to pay taxes to Rome because they don't get anything for it. But at the same time, a lot of people are pouring into this region of the world. And so here you can see climate changes, just like we've talked about in the Indian civilization, push people to migrate. And in this case, they move westward, they move southward, and so all of these people who are kind of living in what's now Germany or Eastern Europe, those people are kind of flooding into the Roman Empire as well, right? So Goths, Slavs, Vandals, all of these people are kind of moving into the empire, either because they've been pushed out of where they were living to begin with, or because they want a piece of Rome for themselves, right? Why do people move to New York or Los Angeles? Because they think it's cool, right? They want to be part of that energy or the ability, they see opportunity there, or it's like a mythical, land of, prosperity or opportunity, right? People move to New York because of that. They move to California because of that. They move to Canada because of that. And here, these people are moving into the Roman Empire because they think the same thing. They're like, there's going to be opportunity, there's going to be prosperity, there's going to be a place for us in the Roman Empire. And so, while the Romans are kind of losing a bit of focus on who they are and looking outward, there's lots of other people, non-Romans, who are kind of pouring into the empire itself. I think we mentioned this earlier, but one of the Roman emperors, Diocletian, he splits the empire in two. He splits it in half because, again, it's getting too big to govern. And so this is before Constantine. He splits the empire in two, with one capital at Rome, the other capital at... Actually, that's not true. He splits it into four at first. Then it becomes two later on. But in the process, the main city slowly becomes Constantinople. And so for most of the Roman period, Rome was the center of it all, right? The hub, the capital. That's where all the power and the money was. But during the kind of second century, fourth century after or in the Common Era, what's happening is that everything is kind of shifting east, right? The money, the power, the influence, all of that is shifting to the eastern part of the empire. So the eastern part of the empire is where the money is, the trade is, people are more interested in being there. And so the city of Byzantium, which is a former Greek colony, is renamed Constantinople and is made the capital of the Eastern Empire by Constantine. It's named after Constantine. It's modern day Istanbul, if you've ever been there. And so Constantine makes that the center of the Eastern Empire. And as time goes on, it will become the capital of the entire empire. And people will kind of slowly start to forget about Rome. Rome will become less important, less wealthy, less powerful, where Constantinople will become more rich and more powerful and more influential. Again, there's lots of people pouring into the western part of the Roman Empire from Western and Eastern Europe. And eventually, the Romans will the Western Roman Empire will try to defend itself against all of these newcomers, but eventually they will fail. And so a Germanic tribe who either immigrates or invades, however you want to describe it, they immigrate or invade Western Roman territory, and they kick out the last Western Roman emperor. And so ironically, his name is Romulus. So the first Roman king is Romulus, and the last Western Roman emperor is Romulus. But yeah, he's overthrown by this Odoacer, who's the head of a Germanic tribe. And so that will kind of end the western part of the empire in 476. So there won't really be a Roman Empire after that. The Byzantine Empire, so the eastern half of the empire, will continue. Okay, and so it'll continue with Constantine. Well, it'll start more with Constantine. It will continue with Justinian here, who is important in kind of restoring and shoring up the Eastern Empire, but also being the last one to speak Latin, the last Roman emperor to speak Latin. And so again, there's the Eastern Empire is kind of evolving and kind of moving further away from its Roman roots and becoming something else. At this time, Justinian builds the Church of Holy Wisdom, Hagia Sophia, which starts out as a Christian church. And so has anyone ever been to in Istanbul? Yeah. Have you been to the building? No? It's what's that? You've heard of it? Yeah. So this is a Christian church built by the Emperor Justinian, right? I think it's around 400 or 500 BCE. For a long time, it was a Christian church. It will be, when this part of the world is conquered by the Ottoman Turks, it will become a mosque. Later, it will become a World Heritage Site. And very recently, President Erdogan of Turkey has turned it back into a mosque, which some people have criticized him for, but he has reverted it back to a mosque rather than a kind of more of a museum or a historical site. Yeah.
Because at the beginning they had no right to change it into a museum because they already bought it from the Christians.
Right.
It's been bought.
Yeah.
And they have a bell of silver.
Mhm.
It's not happening.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
It's been a few things, right? This building. whatever whatever you whatever it is or whatever people think it is, it's pretty magnificent, right? It's whether you look at it as a Christian church or a mosque or a heritage site or all of those things or none of those things, it's a very impressive building, right? And again, it's connected to this Byzantine Empire that is kind of growing in the eastern part of what was Rome. Fantastic. I'd love to go there one day. To Turkey as well, 'cause I think Turkey's pretty cool. Yeah, so this kind of Byzantine Empire in the east will continue from, through the sort of 400s and 500s AD, all the way through the Middle Ages until, again, it's going to be conquered by the Ottoman Turks here in 1453. So the Byzantine Empire will continue on for quite some time. The Ottomans will conquer it. The Ottoman Empire will kind of collapse at the end of World War I in about 1916, 17 or so. But that eastern part of the empire itself will play an important role in sort of the history of the Mediterranean as you carry through the Middle Ages. But the western part of the empire will kind of disappear and disintegrate, right? Rome won't really be anything, right? And so it'll just be a semi-forgotten city. Just to sort of continue the story all the way through, the Middle Ages last from the 5th to the 15th century. And so this is kind of a bridge between kind of the ancient world, the world of the Romans, and the kind of modern world that in Europe starts in the 15th century with the Renaissance in Italy. Have you heard of the Renaissance? Renaissance? Yes? No? We'll talk about it in a minute. So the Middle Ages kind of bridges the ancient world and the modern one. And so there's a lot of kind of political decentralization in the Middle Ages, lots of sort of feudal systems like we talked about in China that are occurring in Europe. In the 7th century, in the 600s, we have the Umayyad Caliphate, a group of Arabs that move out of what's now Saudi Arabia and conquer large sections of the Middle East and Egypt. That happens in this time. Polytheism starts to disappear in Western Europe. And so even though most societies that come from that part of the world, like the Mesopotamians and the Greeks and the Romans, the Greeks, I think I mentioned them already, all of those polytheistic religions will slowly be replaced by mostly monotheistic ones. And so, again, Christianity will spread from the Byzantine Empire through Europe, whereas the Umayyad Caliphate and the Arabs will spread Islam through the Middle East and through Northern Africa. And so, yeah, we have kind of a slow replacement of older polytheistic religions with these newer monotheistic religions. Let me see. In the Middle Ages, we also see Christianity start to splinter into different sects, and so the division between the Catholics and the Protestants is probably the largest one. Again, we said that the Roman version of Christianity became very hierarchical, right? So when those high status Romans kind of started converting to Christianity, they created a social hierarchy within Christianity that was similar to the Roman Empire. The Protestants under Martin Luther said, hey, we don't need all of this superstructure on top of it. We don't need a social hierarchy. You should have a more personal connection to God. And so there was other things too, but around this time we see Christianity split into the Catholic Church and the sort of the Protestant Church, but also the Eastern Orthodox Church. Eastern Orthodox comes more from the Byzantine Empire. the Renaissance kind of kicks off around the 1400s, kind of in Europe, in Italy as well, interestingly. And the Renaissance is kind of a rediscovery of a lot of the ideas of the original Greeks and Romans. And so the Greeks and Romans had a polytheistic religion. They had, the Greeks were interested in science and intellectualism and rationalism and humanism. And so, you know, there was kind of this move toward a more secular society in these earlier with these earlier Greeks and Romans, but things kind of became very religious throughout the Middle Ages as Christianity and Islam became more and more powerful. And so societies became more and more religious. Here in the Renaissance, people start to rediscover some of those ancient ideas about the Greeks and the Romans. And it kind of inspires their thinking and inspires their artwork as well. So we start to see things like this. Have you ever seen the guy on the left? Does he look familiar at all? Who is he? No? Or what is he? Guy on the left is Michelangelo's David. And so if you go to Florence, if you go to, I believe, the Uffizi Gallery in Florence, Italy, you will see this very tall statue of David. He's probably a good 10 or 12 feet tall. He's pretty big. But as you might notice, he's carved, even though he's carved in, I think, the 1500s, so about 600 years ago, he's very much carved in the style of classical Athens, right? So classical Athens, we said, in about maybe about 400 BCE, so about 2,500 years ago. The Greeks were sculpting these very kind of perfect, but also very naturalistic figures, right? And the Renaissance picks that up and copies it, right? And plagiarizes it, if you will, or is inspired by it, whatever you want to say. So David here, carved by Italian sculptor Michelangelo, is very much carved in the style of classical Athens from thousands of years before. Same thing here with this bronze. I don't know who created this bronze here. Do you know who that is? Yeah. So that's a Greek myth. That's a Greek hero Perseus with the head of the Medusa, right? And if you've seen Clash of the Titans, you can see that you can see that happen. But there's Perseus with the head of the Medusa, right? So basically 2,000 years after the end of classical Athens, in a Christian country, here we have the rebirth of Greek ideas, of Greek sculpture, and also Greek mythology, right? And there's lots of sculptures like this that are very much in the ancient Greek style, but also the subjects are Greek myths, right? So do you know who David is? I believe this is the David from the Bible, the one who slays Goliath. Familiar with that one? Yeah. I believe this is that David. And so here we have, you know, a sculpture that's done in the Greek style, but the subject is a Christian biblical story, right? A biblical figure. And of course, here on the right, we have something in the Greek style, but the subject is a Greek myth.
So the Star of David is
I think the Star of David is I think it's King David that they're referring to, I think. But don't quote me on that because I'm not entirely sure of the origin of that star. But I think it's probably King David, because he's the more important David in the Old Testament. This is a less important David. Yeah, so we have Renaissance painters. Oh boy, who painted this? Shoot. I forget who painted this. It might be Raphael, but I'm not sure. But this is a Renaissance painting that depicts the academy in Athens. So Plato's academy, the academy that Plato started. Remember the the student of Socrates himself. So here we have Renaissance painters in the 1500s painting this stuff from ancient classical Athens, right? And so all of the important figures are there. That's probably Plato in the middle in the red robe. That's probably his student Aristotle walking beside him and talking about very intellectual things, I'm sure. But again, these Renaissance artists are inspired, right, by the literature, by the plays, by the scientific and philosophical thought, the artistic styles. All of those things are back, right? You know how with fashion, things, go out of fashion and then they come back in later on? Ancient Greece and ancient Rome are in fashion in the Renaissance, and people are using these things, right? Here, this is who painted this? Shoot! I can't remember. My art history is not great, but this is the birth of Venus, right? So this is a Roman myth about how the goddess Venus, who is Aphrodite in the Greek, how she is born, right? And here it is, a Renaissance painting showing this ancient Greek myth, right? Again, it's fashionable. Here's probably one of the most famous pieces of art from the Renaissance, not connected really to Greece or Rome, but do you know who this is? Yeah, it's Mona Lisa, right? Who painted her? Yeah, this is Leonardo da Vinci, right? So da Vinci, of course, is an important part of this Renaissance thing that's happening. He's a painter, he's a sculptor, he's an inventor, he's a writer, he's a man of science. He does everything. And in fact, we talk about people who can do lots of different things as Renaissance men. Sorry, women, but Renaissance men. And Leonardo is a Renaissance man. He does it all. He sculpts, he paints, he invents, he writes. Multi-talented. Here's another section of Leonardo's stuff. Here's some of Leonardo's inventions. So Leonardo da Vinci, like I said, was sculpting, he was painting, he was doing scientific experiments and writing, but he was also inventing. And so here he's inventing a water pump or a water wheel. And so you can see some of his original kind of designs for his invention. Clever guy, right? So all of these things are kind of happening in sort of Central Europe and Italy during the Renaissance. A rediscovery of Greek art, Greek and Roman art, Greek and Roman ideas, Greek and Roman religion and mythology, but also philosophical, logical thought, right? And I've talked about this a lot in this course, where there's a lot of things in this world that are unanswerable, right? The questions we don't know the answer to. What happens when you die, right? We don't know that answer. And we said, often we look up there for the answer, right? We look to religion, we look to the heavens. The Greeks started to look down around them, right? They had this idea that if you paid close attention to the world around you and you observed carefully, you could figure it out. You could figure out how the world works, because they felt the world operated according to universal principles, right? And so if you paid attention, you could figure it out. And again, that was kind of the beginning of science, right? And those ideas were kind of lost for a long time as the Middle East and as Europe went through a pretty heavily religious period in the Middle Ages. But those ideas get discovered again in the Renaissance, and they find their way through into a slightly later period called the Enlightenment. And so in Europe, the Enlightenment is an important period because it kind of reintroduces some of these ideas to Europe and to their governance system in terms of, you can see here, right? Ideas like liberty and progress, fraternity, constitutional government, the separation of church and state. We were talking about that in social justice yesterday and the day before, right? France's idea of secularism and laicite, those ideas can be traced back to the Enlightenment in the 1700s. And they can further be traced back all the way to ancient Rome and ancient Greece, right? So some thinkers that come out of the Enlightenment here, now we're in kind of the 1700s in Europe, are people like Thomas Hobbes, right? Thomas Hobbes does a number of important writings about the rights of the individual, right? Now we take for granted that everybody has human rights, but in the 1700s, there was no such thing, right? If you were a noble person, you did whatever you wanted. And if you were a poor person, you did what the nobles told you to, or they would kill you, right? And Thomas Hobbes says, no, actually, everybody has rights. Everyone is a human. Everyone is technically equal as a man. And there's some sexism in there, I know, but humans are equal, right? This is like radical stuff in the 1700s, right? The idea that the political order is artificial, right? We said that one of the functions of religion was that it supported the rulers, right? Why is this person in charge? Well, they have the mandate of heaven, right? Why is this person in charge? Well, because they're a god on earth. Pharaoh is a god on earth. Why is this king in charge? Well, the gods have blessed him, right? Thomas Hobbes says, no, people are in charge not because of anything to do with the gods. They're in charge because of we've put them in charge somehow, or they have the power to take charge. But the political order is artificial. It's not created by the gods. It's not universal in any way. It's not a law of the universe. It's just something that humans create. And he suggests that all legitimate political power comes from the people, right? It doesn't come from God. It doesn't come from the king or the emperor. It comes from the people, right? The people must give someone the power to rule them. And that's the basis of democracy. And he borrows that from ancient Greece, right? And from ancient Rome. The idea that the people have the power and the people give that power to someone else to rule, right? Whether it's members of the Greek democracy, whether it's the consuls in Rome, power comes from the people. It doesn't come from the heavens. It doesn't come from the kingship, right? And again, that's in the 1700s. That's revolutionary, but it's going to influence the development of France. It's going to influence the development of the United States, and it's going to influence the development of other European countries as well. This guy's important as well, right? So he's got probably the longest name I think I've ever seen. Mostly he's just referred to as Montesquieu, French guy. He talks about separation of powers, right? So here in Canada we have an executive branch of the government that runs the country. We have a legislative part of the government that passes the laws, and we have a judicial part of the government that presides over the law courts, right? Those things are separate, right? Those powers are separate. And Montesquieu is one of the ones who says, yes, we need a government that isn't all powerful. We need a government that has their power divided so that, the government cannot sort of control everything, if you will. Yeah, so the executive, the legislative, the judicial, that comes from Montesquieu in the 1700s. Canada is built on that. That's our Constitution says that that's what we have. And it says that because of Montesquieu. And Montesquieu says it because of what people were talking about in the Renaissance, and he says it because of what was happening in ancient Rome and ancient Greece. So, again, a lot of these ideas from the Enlightenment find their way into the modern era, right? And so France, the French Revolution, the Enlightenment, those are huge events in Western Europe, and they inspire people all throughout Europe and in North America to kind of build their governmental systems based on those ideas. So the French Revolution, the Enlightenment, the creation of the Republic of France, hugely influential to Western Europe and to North America. And again, their ideas come from the Renaissance, and their ideas come from ancient Rome, whose ideas, most of their ideas come from ancient Greece. And so, again, there's this very kind of connected line all the way through history that takes us from ancient Athens 2,500 years ago, really all the way to today, where our, the Western European countries, many other countries too, but also Canada and the US, are built on those ideas that originally appeared, in some cases, thousands of years ago. Wild, right? It's a wild ride the past 2,000 years. Okay, any questions at the moment? Seeing none, I'm going to, let's take a break, and then when we come back, we'll just do a quick review on Rome, and then we'll move on to some BC First Nations stuff. Okay, so yeah, let's take a break. I'll see you in 10 minutes, and we'll do that. Okay. So, don't forget masks on at all times now, because you're not wearing a mask and you need to be. You two know.
I can't keep it on. I can't breathe.
You can't breathe?
Actually,
You cannot breathe? Is it too tight or
it's not good, like, for some reason.
for some
I will go to the doctor and get his nose, but I can't keep it on all the day.
Okay.
I get like short of breathe. I don't
Okay.
like breathe that way.
Okay. Do your best to keep it as covered as you can. Okay. So, before we leave Rome, and I should have had a slide on this, but I don't. Let's summarize Rome based on those categories that we did for all the others. So, culture and environment. So, what did we know about the environment of Rome? What's that? There's supposed to be, but there currently isn't. Let me just see if I go. What's going to happen here? Let me see. Okay. Oh. Okay. I can't see what's on the. I can't see what's on my streaming screen now, but culture and environment was one of them, right? So, what do we know or remember about how the environment itself affected Roman culture or history? Right? We knew that initially Rome, well, not initially, but we heard at the beginning that Rome was had a bunch of hills within it, but it was also had a very swampy, marshy river, right? So that kind of protected it from invaders, right? It made it safer, made it easier for them to defend their city. What else did we hear about? Yeah, so it was close to the sea. They had a port, so they could very easily trade with the rest of the world. But they were far enough away so that they wouldn't be surprised by an army sort of showing up on their shores in a bunch of ships, right? So that helped them out as well. What else did we hear about in the environment with Rome? We're talking about, nope, sorry, I just borrowed that slide from India. We're talking about Rome, culture and environment. Just gonna see if anyone, yeah, online people, you can chime in here as well. I'm trying to think. I don't know that the environment came up in any other context.
Rome used to be tiny.
What's that?
Rome used to be tiny.
Yeah, Rome used to be, yeah, it used to be a tiny city and that nobody paid attention to, and became much larger and certainly much more powerful.
There's not talk about so much agriculture. They were not doing so much agriculture because of their geographical.
They were, but they became very densely populated, and a lot of people who owned farmland weren't farmers. And so Rome wound up managing or having to import a lot of grain that they weren't growing. So they kind of, I guess they didn't really manage their agricultural resources very well, because most of it was owned by rich, wealthy people, you could say. What else? Other connections to the environment? I guess you could say they modified their environment in that they built roads all throughout the Roman Empire, right? Which allowed people to travel and to trade, which was beneficial for them. Maybe that's more of an interactions and exchanges point, but they did build a lot of roads. I kind of think that that's it for culture and environment, as far as I'm aware.
We can add, like, their culture is based on giving sacrifices for the
Later on in their history, it is. right? Once they actually have emperors, yeah, they sacrifice to the gods, but also to the emperor themselves. That actually fits nicely into the next category, which is politics. So power, authority, and governance. Gosh, did we hear anything about those in ancient Rome?
Oh, yeah, we did.
Yeah, it's all a ton of things about that. What did we hear about politics in Rome? A lot, but
So much was comparing to what we've been studying for athletes, like not equality, so much gap between rich and poor.
yeah,
Either, so yeah, that's kind of either slave working or very high status person.
yeah. So we know there's pretty significant social inequality in Rome, and again, the middle class as we know it today is kind of that's an invention of the modern world. The ancient world was much more, lots of poor people, a few rich people, maybe a few people in between, but that's kind of it, right? So the middle class as we know it is a modern invention, and so the Romans didn't really have people like that. Other political things.
Yeah, the complex political narrative.
They had a complex political ladder. Oh yeah, they had a complex political ladder that allowed men to be elected to certain positions. What else? Right? There were two kind of broad classes of people, the patricians and the plebeians. Patricians were descended from the original 100 Roman senators, and the plebeians were everybody else. Baha?
Oh, we've seen some changes in their governing system where they first established with city-state and provinces, and then when they expanded, they started modifying their governing system.
Yeah, so they kind of went through three different governmental systems in their history, right? They started out with what? Did somebody say monarchy? Did you say monarchy? Awesome. Yeah? Yeah, so they started out with a monarchy, and then they had a republic, and then they had an empire, right? Which was kind of another type of monarchy, sort of. Yeah, so they went through three periods with different governmental systems. What else?
Also, we have seen some changes of their perspective of having high status for serving in the military, whereas in the beginning you can't serve in the military unless you have a rank. After that, they needed more warriors, so they made it easier. Also, we have seen some recognizable first people, where in Athens and Sparta we only heard about a group of people, right? In Rome, like, these are remarkable persons who made Rome.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah. So we heard that. Sorry, I was thinking about your second point. Your first one was that. Oh yeah. So the army became a little more democratized, if you will, right? So rather than landowning citizens being in the military, anyone could be in the military, and the military became a standing army, an army of the state, right? We saw that. We also know a lot about individual people, right? We know what they did, what they said, who their ancestors were, when they got elected to what office. The amount that we know about Rome is staggering, right? And again, it's that difference between writing things down and not, right? Cultures that don't write anything down, they're tough to really know anything about in the past, right? We have to kind of guess at what they were doing and believing and feeling. The more people write down, the more we know. And the Romans wrote a lot of stuff down, and we have a lot of those things. And so, yeah, we know all about people like Marcus Licinius Crassus, right? We know this guy's whole life story, and it's pretty amazing, actually. other things about politics.
We've seen individual persons changing the world by themselves.
Yeah, I guess we saw we saw a breakdown of the Republican system itself, right? We saw people using their armies to, to use the state for their own benefit, right? And that's, quite tragic, but yeah, we saw people abusing the state. Amanpreet, what were you going to say?
That was the first and second. And
Oh, yeah, there were a couple of triumvirates.
yeah,
What were those triumvirates in general?
the first one and second.
Yeah, but what were they?
Alliance.
Yeah, there was a few alliances between powerful Roman generals, right? And so we saw them kind of, I guess, achieving their own goals by allying and using the state for their own purposes. I know there's lots of other stuff, but anything else that we should mention in the political section?
Yes. It's kind of related to the end what we've been talking about earlier, the change of their religion and people of authority. They start to become not people of Rome, but like foreign people.
Yeah, this society went through a pretty profound religious change, right? And so that was probably similar to maybe some other civilizations we've talked about. Mesopotamia definitely had different religions and different gods appear over time. The Egyptians were pretty consistent with their religion throughout their history. India had a number of different spiritual traditions or faiths that kind of evolved from there. But I guess, again, we know so much about Rome. We know that it actually underwent a pretty significant religious change, right? From a polytheistic religion that sort of eventually evolved to worshiping emperors to a monotheistic religion, right? That was very kind of originally based in equality anyway. So yeah, that was a big gear shift, right? That's a big change, and that happened as well. What about interactions and exchanges? What do we know about that?
They were very wary of their neighbors.
What's that?
They were very wary of their neighbors.
Right. When they started out, the Romans were very kind of concerned about their neighbors, right? And so often they would attack the people next to them just so that those people wouldn't attack them, right? It was kind of the best defense is a good offense, if you will. And so yeah, the Romans are suspicious of their neighbors and start taking them over, right? And then eventually they find out that taking over your neighbors can actually make you pretty rich, right? Pretty rich. What else? Interactions and exchanges.
We've seen some roles of women later on, especially with the spread of Christianity.
Right. So there's a change in. Let's see. I don't know if there's so much of a change in the role of women in Roman society so much, but the early part of Christianity has women are very important to that story. I think once Christianity becomes mainstream, women are kind of pushed to the side again, if you will. Sorry, women, but I think that's kind of what happens. What else? Interactions and exchanges.
When we consider about the rise and falling of Rome, in other history, when we see the rise of one empire or governing system, then the decline of it right away is another government authority comes out, whereas we see, first of all, switching between two religions, and the Christian religion start to be dominating, then the Roman Empire started.
Yeah, so it's not kind of a rise and fall of an empire, right? It's kind of like it's a rise, and then the empire kind of divides itself in two, and the western part kind of dies, right? It sort of slowly dies, whereas the eastern part kind of evolves into something totally different, right? Something that's based more in kind of Eastern culture, but is also based in Christianity, right? And it's kind of a totally different thing than the Roman Empire that came before it, right? Based in the Roman Empire, but it evolves, right? Whereas the Western part just kind of withers and dies away. Yeah, kind of weird.
And also comparing other cultures, we see them like being conquered by other people, whereas so they can be their empire fall apart. But in Rome, we've seen like the people among Rome, they started like being interested in other cultures, which led to them being for their empire to be.
Yeah, we see kind of kind of an abandonment of their own values and sort of a search for something else, right? Something new, something different, something exotic. I'm not really sure, right? And again, maybe that's something to do with the fact that we know so much about the Romans. Maybe other cultures have done that as well, and we just don't know it. But yeah, there's kind of there's kind of an abandonment of the ideas of Rome, right? Rome is just not in fashion anymore, right? The East is in fashion. Rome is so yesterday, right? And so again, it's kind of there's a cultural shift going on, right? Cultural shift going on. If I may say so, a similar thing happened in Canada, probably around the First World War. And so if you go back before World War I, most Canadians really thought of themselves as British. And so they were kind of like British people who lived in Canada, okay? And so they still had very strong ties to Britain. They had relatives there. Some Canadians had recently arrived from Britain. And so they had really strong ties to the British Isles. But after World War I, Canada kind of distinguished itself in the war as something different, right? So the Canadian soldiers were kind of working together in Canadian units. They kind of developed this sense of being Canadian, and so kind of after World War II, Canada kind of shifts, right? And so instead of feeling like, yeah, we're just British people living in Canada, people started to see themselves as actual Canadians, right? And whatever that means, whatever that identity is, kind of started to kind of evolve and develop after World War I. And so here we kind of see a similar thing, right? A cultural change where, the Romans don't see themselves so much as linked to their Roman past, but they're kind of looking elsewhere, right? They're looking outside, which is kind of the opposite of what the Canadians were doing, but still, it's a cultural change, right? It's a change in identity and how people see themselves. Conflicts and conflict resolution.
We've seen a lot of conflict.
Conflicts, right? Lots of lots of wars with other people, lots of civil wars. What else did we see? We saw a pretty significant political assassination, but Caesar, of course, wasn't the only political assassination that took place, and probably there were numerous ones. He's just the most famous or significant. What else do we see? Yeah, lots of, probably almost constant warfare, I would say, right?
Can you see the list?
Sure. sorry. I know it says India.
Conflicts with Christians.
Oh, right. Okay. The Romans were in conflict. The Romans were in conflict with Christians, right, at various points, and especially as the Christians became, at first they were a scapegoat, and then they were just kind of common criminals who would not sacrifice to the Roman gods. But later they became a real kind of force in Rome, right? There were large numbers of Christians running around, and eventually they managed to gain control of the empire, or the empire gains control of them, or they just kind of fused together. I don't know how you want to see it, but yeah, there was conflicts between the Romans and Roman religion and early Christians as well, for sure. What's the last one there? Oh, values and beliefs. Okay. What kind of values and beliefs did we hear about?
At the beginning, they were so much attached to Rome. At the end, it seems being dragged away from Rome.
Yeah, so early Rome, Republican Rome, is really they're really kind of in love with themselves.
It's like Sparta.
What's that?
It's like Sparta economy.
It's like Sparta?
Yeah, economy.
In which way?
Like being so much connected to their city.
Right. So like the Spartans, the Romans were they put their city first, right? Rome came first, just like Sparta came first.
It's the same for most Greek cities.
Yeah.
Not just Rome.
Yeah, and that's true as well, right? So the city-state, in many cases came first. Sparta is probably the most extreme example of that, for sure. But yeah, the Romans had a really strong. Being Roman was an important part of their identity, right? And they were expected to put Rome almost before all else, right? And so they were very much invested in this idea of being Romans and what Rome was and what it meant. And of course that changed over time, but they definitely started out with a very strong, I guess patriotic, is what you might say, patriotic or feelings toward Rome. Kind of reminds me of the Americans, actually, how the Americans are, being American is a very important part of, what it means to be part of that country, right? And being American it's a real identity, right? In a way, I think that, well, no, maybe that's not right. I feel like the Americans are comparable in that way. They really have a strong sense of patriotism and identity and of being an American. And I think the Romans had that earlier in their history, I think. What else? Values and beliefs?
Change in religion.
What's that?
Change in religion.
Right? So their values and beliefs changed over time, right? From a polytheistic religion based on the Greeks to this new monotheistic religion of Christianity. That changed.
The boys had 4 names, and the girls had 1.
All right, we learned a little bit about the Roman naming system, right? Where all men had usually 3 names. Some of them only had 2, but most of them had 3 names, right? Whereas women were not they didn't pay as much attention to their names, right? That is true. What else? Values and beliefs. Oh, right. What were those 3 important values for the Romans? Yeah, authoritas, dignitas, gravitas. Right? What are those 3 things? Yeah, authority, dignity, seriousness, right? So the Romans prized the ability to have authority, right? The ability to tell other people what to do. And that authority was based on dignitas, your dignity, your following of the rules and living up to your responsibilities. And your gravitas was your seriousness, right? The kind of weight that you hold, right? Gravitas. And we still use that word actually in modern society, right? People whose presence has a lot of like weight and seriousness. People that you like, when they start talking, you like listen to them. They have a lot of gravitas. They have a lot of, you pay attention to them, right? You listen to them. You know when they're in the room, right? They have a lot of presence, if you will. Yeah, so those things are important to the Romans too. What else? Yeah, I guess maybe the only other thing we can say is that, a lot of those original values and beliefs they were abandoned, right? They were forgotten. So as the Roman Republic became more rich and more focused on gaining power and glory and money, people kind of forgot about those original values, right? And people kind of just did what was best for them, right? Whatever made them the most money and gave them the most power, that's what they did, right? And so they kind of lost track of their original values, right? Anything else? Actually covered a lot. That was good. All right, good people. We only have a few minutes left, so I think I may leave it there for today. It doesn't make sense to sort of start a new unit with like a few minutes left. So I'll leave it there for today. Quiz tomorrow, day off Friday. I'll see you Monday, and we'll do a little, not a deep dive, but a shallow dive into BC First Nation stuff. So that is all. I will see you all tomorrow. Have a good afternoon. That is it.